I decided to sit down and go, okay, what do I want this podcast to stand for? And I made a list of values that I was like, these are how I show up in my work. These are how I show up in my life. These are things that inform who I am. And what is, like, if I'm kind of stripping it back, less about transformation, like we do in marketing messaging, and more about having this set of kind of steady, Freddy, consistent values where we can evolve the messaging over time and the types of themes. The Brave OT seems to be consistent. There's that conscious rebellion. That's the juiciest one in there, right?
It's a great one. It pops every time I read it.
You're listening to the Brave OT podcast with me, Carlin Naik. This podcast is all about empowering occupational therapists to step up, level up, blaze some trails, and maybe engage in a little conscious rebellion in service of our profession, our clients, our work, our businesses, and living our mission wholeheartedly. We are all about keeping it real, doing hard things, unhustling, being curious, exploring, growing through our challenges, and finding joy, fulfillment, and vitality as we do so. Really, we're OTing ourselves and each other. I hope you love this episode. Talking about yourself is a little bit hard to do in monologue. It can be done, but I decided to take a different approach with this first episode of the Brave OT podcast. I chose to have a guest interviewer. Normally guests on a podcast are interviewees, but I'm switching it up here. Do you see a theme? I met Arno van Vuuren about a year before I started this podcast when he invited me to talk with him about acceptance and commitment therapy on his YouTube channel, The OT Minute. He asks great questions and is easy to talk to, so I made a mental note at that time to work with him in this way again. The time is now, so let's dive in.
I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit about mission and values and those types of things. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Well, great. So how important would you say for OTs and OT entrepreneurs, how important is it to have a clear mission statement? And how would you maybe define that for somebody who's maybe just starting that process of finding a mission statement, or maybe somebody who needs to reevaluate their mission statement?
So I think that one of the things I find tricky as an OT and a business owner and a human and all of the things is that we as OTs always look at the whole person and all their roles as a package, right? So I think this is good, right? It's our frame of reference. It's what we care about. People in context in all of their occupations, all of their roles, all of their engaging in all of their values. And I think that if we as individuals can be aligning our own values with how we're showing up in all of our roles, then it kind of becomes almost impossible not to be authentic. And so there's like I was thinking, you sent me the questions in advance, which I really appreciate. And I was kind of thinking, is this about a personal mission statement, or is this about a business mission statement? And when I looked closer, well, for me, the two are so intertwined that I can't separate them. And that's kind of the secret sauce. Like once you figure out that, like, I feel like I had a giant aha moment the other day where it was just like, oh, so I just have to be me. And that's it. Like then just the rest becomes more fluid because you just kind of center in, well, who am I and how do I want to show up? What's important in me showing up in relationships, in work, in marketing, in business, in leisure activities. Those kind of come back to your own values, which inform your mission statement. I think a mission can be more like, well, what's that outcome? What am I working toward? What do I want to accomplish in a particular thing? So for my business, I really want to empower other OTs to live fully, to show up authentically, to have that ability to be brave, and I'll get more into that a little bit later. But that's all informed by my values, which are my values, whether I'm being mom or Carlin the OT, Carlin the potter, Carlin the entrepreneur, Carlin the coach. Those values kind of go through all of it. So I think I didn't even answer your question, which was how important it is for OTs to do this. And I feel like it's an evolution of knowing yourself that as you set out, you might not fully understand who you are and how you want to show up, but start with something. Like start with a clear aim and allow room for that to change as you figure it out.
I love that you differentiate that, because I think it's easy for us to think about maybe our organization that we're running or a particular project and create a mission for that, but really to take a step back and kind of really take the time to identify what's my personal mission. I think that's an interesting differentiation. It makes a lot of sense, because I feel like a lot of the dissonance that people experience in OT or whatnot is when personal values kind of conflict with what they're experiencing in the work environment or whatever it is that they're experiencing.
And that can be really traumatic. Like when you think about extremes, whereas like moral injury, which I think a lot of healthcare professionals experienced in frontline settings where they couldn't provide the service or the adequate care that was required because the resources weren't there, because the staffing wasn't there, because the precautions in place and that sort of thing, right? And that's an extreme version, but we need to be working in alignment. And maybe all of our personal convictions might not fully align with an organization that is our employer. But if we can find enough connections and be in roles where we are connected to those values, then there is less dissonance and we're more comfortable and more effective.
Yeah. And I think that burnout component's really an important part of that. And I think it kind of leads me to kind of the second question that I wanted to ask is, what are some of the symptoms when maybe there isn't a clear mission statement or there's that ambiguity? What do you kind of see from maybe OTs you're working with? And I know you work with a lot of people who have experienced burnout or, are in a difficult place.
I don't have a good answer for that one. I think we all present so differently. So I see that in burnout, one of the things that can happen is we get a sense of apathy. Like I can't have an impact here anyways. I can't show up the way I want to. So I need to stop fighting that and just go, did what I can. Like, I don't know, just gonna check out and survive this when people are that can be a stage of burnout or a symptom somewhere along the line of burnout. And so I do see that happening in people, and that is distressing, right? We as helpers, right? We went into this to help. And if you check out, you're not helping. And there's boundaries in there, right? Like, so if we're in, completely open, boundaryless, and everything's coming and going, we're not effective. And if we're in this sense of apathy where, we just don't even care, we're not effective. But there has to be somewhere in the middle where we can remain objective and connected and sense what's going on and make wise choices that are informed by some logic, some connection, some understanding. And, if we're completely burnt out, we're not there anymore. And that, it's sort of like meta distress, because you're distressed and that's why you're doing it. And then you're distressed about being there. See that as one of the things. I'm seeing a lot of things. So just people, self-care tends to go first, doing the things that help us take care of ourselves. Leisure activities tend to go. We just kind of try to get all of our basics done, and then we don't have any left over for ourselves. That's really hard in burnout. But man, I could talk about burnout for days and days.
Not necessarily the most positive topic, but what an important one. I just recently was at a CU in my workplace, and they were talking about, particularly during COVID, the importance for healthcare workers, and some of the same things they mentioned was just the importance of self-care. And I thought it was really interesting. I wasn't practicing throughout COVID. I was still a student and had kind of become a practitioner in the middle, somewhere along the way. And I thought it was really interesting because we're in an inpatient rehab setting, and one of the OTs particularly shared that just the weight of having to be the family member to that person, like because family couldn't visit necessarily. So they were taking on the role of, family member in addition to healthcare provider. And there's so much emotional distress and fear and those types of things. So I think it's helpful to one, acknowledge that burnout component of the job. And then I appreciate you mentioning just the importance of self-care, and that tends to be one of the first things that go,
And I think we get this kind of message about token self-care, like just add that on, one more thing to add on to your list of things to do, as though you didn't have enough. You should probably, and I give a keynote the other day in the UK for a group of OTs through the Royal College of OTs, and they asked me to talk about self-care. End up kind of going, well, a keynote's supposed to be more inspiring than informative, and any one of them can give a talk on self-care. We talk about it all the time, but that there needs to be a fundamental shift in our mindset around self-care, that it isn't another thing to tack onto the to-do list, another thing we should probably get to if we have some time. It needs to go the other way, that we need to value ourselves as the center of that fundamental resource. We need to be resourcing first, and then from there, creating energy, creating momentum, creating our ability to give. But it's not an add-on. It needs to be a prerequisite to showing up in life. And deep self-care, it's not, just going for a massage or something, right? It's like taking care of your spiritual needs, taking care of your sleep, taking care of your rest needs, like taking care of your nervous system. These are really big things that need to come from a place of resourcing in order to function, not, you should probably do more self-care and then you'll feel better.
So talking about creating that mission and trying to clarify it, in the midst of the complexity and messiness of life, and, how, any tips or strategies, like how do you take somebody through the process of trying to identify what is my mission as a unique person, as a unique practitioner?
So when I was trying to figure out how I was going to answer the question about mission statement and kind of doing that personal or business mission statement, I Googled it, of course, and I found a Forbes article, Forbes magazine article that said a personal mission statement, because I think it all has to come from that personal first, describes your convictions, what you stand for, and how you plan to create a life that embodies your values. In other words, it becomes your personal definition of success, one that is separate from the approval of others. And so it's about you and how you define success. And ultimately, that's showing up aligned with your values. And the short answer is, well, we have to figure out our values first. And from that place of our values, we can then inform the flavor of our mission. So our mission, if it's for me to elevate other OTs, then that needs to be informed by a set of values. And so then stepping back and figure out, well, what are my values that inform that? That gives you the clarity of why you're doing this, and from a grounded place, what that's grounded in. It needs to be grounded in your values. So I hope people figure out their values first, and then that informs the mission statement.
I love that, because the way I set up the interview was mission, let's talk mission, and then let's talk values. And I love that we're kind of needing to flip that a little bit. That's interesting. That's really cool. Makes sense.
Inextricably intertwined they are.
That's true. I guess they could probably inform each other a little bit,
Exactly.
Because one of the statements that kind of caught my attention was, I think it's from the OT Rising page, and it's from you. You say, I empower OT business owners to get off the path to burnout, to find more balance, flow, and vitality in their lives. And there's kind of two components of that mission statement that I thought was interesting and that I find would be important to have. One is who are you trying to serve, or, and I think that works with personal mission statements as well, whether it's, who are the people that you're trying to serve? Is it others in general, or is it your family? Like what's that? And then the second component of that is, what do you hope to accomplish? So for you make it clear that, for that page that it's for OT business owners that seem to be burnt out, that's kind of your target demographic who you want to serve. And then what you want to accomplish is more balance, more flow, more vitality. And I think that clarity is important. And so I can see how maybe you can start sometimes a mission, sometimes at values, and just kind of have to keep digging through and until they meet. I don't know. Would you say that's kind of how the process goes for yourself, or?
Yeah, it's messy. So as you're talking about, I'm thinking about different parts of my journey where some of those things were different, but they were all fundamentally rooted in my values. And so in business and marketing, like, it's really not my mission in life to only help OTs, right? I didn't go into OT to help OTs. I like helping people, but it's a business thing that you need to be really specific and clear. Because if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. So if I was the person who just wanted everybody to live a better life, people are like, okay, yeah, like, great. So don't we all? Like, what makes you so special, sort of thing. And so and I've only actually avoided talking about burnout in the beginning when I was creating Activate Vitality, because to differentiate my OT and my coaching work, I wanted to really not make my coaching work diagnosis connected. And burnout can be used as more of a descriptor, like anxiety. And anxiety can also be a diagnosis, generalized anxiety disorder. We can find these things, right, in the DSM or in ICD codes and things like that. So burnout does have some clinical connection, and so I needed to differentiate, because from a regulatory perspective, I'm registered to be an OT to clients only in the province where I am regulated. Well, now there's some interprovincial within Canada, but so one of the lines I chose to draw in the sand, because there weren't any clear lines from a regulatory perspective, was that I wasn't going to make it diagnosis specific. And then I thought, no, like, burnout as a descriptor, like, I'm not like, if it's clinical, like severe, like burnout syndrome, no, I'm not the one for you. But burnout, we're all experiencing some degree of feeling burnt out. Most of us, if we've been living through a pandemic, doing whatever we've been trying to do, and the world keeps changing, that's exhausting. And so it's kind of become one of the themes I've talked about. So I guess this is where we differentiate mission from values, because I really want everybody to live life fully and have that ability to take care of themselves and be grounded in their values and showing up authentically and not killing themselves to do so. I want to empower everybody to do that. But as my business evolved, it became clearer and clearer that OTs were struggling to show up for themselves. They were just under-resourced, exhausted, and just giving it all away. And the pandemic magnified that. I could equally say it's a mission of life to help people with ADHD feel empowered. It could be, women of middle age. Like, there's so much growth and beautiful things that happen to us in this phase of life as well. And I'm passionate about those things. But the evolution of Activate Vitality has become to talk more about this. Okay, we're coming from a place of needing to get clearer on who we are and how we want to show up and make really intentional choices about that. And burnout is sort of one of the descriptors that might describe how a person might come to knowing that they need that help.
Interesting. Now, I know you've kind of taken on this new project of the Brave OT podcast, which that's kind of exciting. As you've kind of approached this project, how was that process for you? Values kind of undergird whatever you try to do. How has that kind of evolved into the mission for this podcast?
Well, first off, I really love being on podcasts. I feel like that just having great conversations with other people who want to dig into the nitty gritty, and OTs, we speak a certain language and we come with a certain set of frameworks that cause us to think the same, but then we can discuss the nitty gritty in between and have really deep, juicy conversations. I love that. I can't do that in a webinar or, a solo presentation as effectively as in conversation. So I found that I loved being on your YouTube channel, the OT minute and having a conversation about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. I've loved being on all the podcasts I've been on. And I thought, okay, like ultimately, I need to engage in putting content out there to serve and connect with people. And that helps my business. And so I thought, okay, I think I think I need to make a podcast. That's my next thing. But then I thought, okay, well, what am I going to call this thing? Like, what am I trying to stand for? And I didn't want it to be exactly Activate Vitality. I thought about it, but then as I've explained, the way I've described the outcomes and who I'm helping and how I'm helping has evolved over time. So if I made it sort of version 1.7, and that was specifically what the podcast was about, that might be too specific and not leave room for the growth that I need it to show. And so I kind of thought, I'll come back to values. How do I want to help people? And it will also connect then back. I can adjust the messaging and have that ability to flex and evolve within it if I keep it a little bit broader, but still connected to my values.
Interesting. One of the things that your story kind of reminded me of is kind of the idea that if we have a clearly defined mission, it seems that we might be able to recognize opportunities a little easier. So if we know our values, we know generally the mission that we want to accomplish. So it seems like you kind of took part in some podcasts and then started to see the opportunity that lined up with your mission. Would you say that's kind of how part of that process worked?
I'd love to say it was as intentional as that. But if I like dig in and really analyze what happened, that's what happened. But it might not have been as overt. It might sort of been like, oh, I really like podcasts. I really like listening to podcasts. Always when I'm listening to podcasts, I want to jump into the conversation. I'm like, why can't you hear me? I have something to contribute to this conversation. And then I like being on podcasts. Well, what's that all about? Like I didn't, and in my business, I need to connect with people and really show who I am and be authentic. And when I look at the values I write down in my planner every week that kind of inform my choices in a week, my choices in activities, my choices in how I'm showing up or what needs to be prioritized, authentic connection goes on the page every single week. And so authentic connection can happen better in conversation than in presenting out there to the masses without anybody in front of me. So it's sort of more in almost like an activity analysis that I get to going, oh, that's why it works. Okay, I need to do more of that.
Well, I think as OTs, it's interesting because we, you mentioned looking back at things that you seem to have enjoyed, things that you participate in. And I think as OTs, we look at habits, we look at roles and routines. And if we have it written down or if we track it, it seems like that could be a good resource to potentially start to dig into both values and then mission as well. Is why am I enjoying these things? Why can't I get this thing off my mind because I'm passionate about it? So, any tips maybe from an OT perspective, how can we help ourselves or even maybe our clients who seem like they're missing something? How can we use our OT skills, our frame of reference to help ourselves and others?
This is going to sound like a shameless plug, but this is how I do it. So I use my planner. So I've got the Activate Vitality Personal Development Planner, and that came from a process where I started practicing in a way where I loved passion planners. I probably have bought 70 passion planners because I would buy them for my clients and that sort of things. And I noticed that as I'm kind of recording, like I still have a digital planner, always have, and but that's for my appointments where I need to be, when, what time, who's expecting me. These need to happen at specific times. But I use my planner more to go, okay, well, how do I want to be living my life this week? What needs to be happening? And also reflecting on, wow, I was exhausted this week. I went into the weekend miserable. I was irritable. What was going on? And that's a process of sort of combining journaling and reflection with planning. And so looking at filling out like big smiley faces and stickers where, wow, I felt lit up when I did that. And, oh, I feel exhausted every Wednesday. Why do I feel exhausted every Wednesday? Oh, well, look at all the things I'm doing every Wednesday. What can I do to make that better? What can I do to feel more connected to myself, feel more connected to my values, feel more connected to the people I care about, and less exhausted? And so I've always done that myself with planners, and with my mental health clients as planners, and then with planners. And then I came to build the Activate Vitality Planner with information on how to come to that. So when you notice that you've got big hearts and smiley faces and highlights on certain types of things, we'll start to look back over the last couple of months and go, oh, every time I am doing something creative or something outdoors in nature or something that's very deeply authentically connecting, like those are some of my big ones, I feel fantastic. I feel flow. I find energy that I didn't think was there because of those things. Those inform my values. And then those values inform my choices, occupational choices, intentional choices, how I'm, do I need to get out into nature every single week in order to feel better, to feel more alive, to find vitality? Yes. And that becomes clear from reflecting. We don't see that in our digital calendar. And so I really I like a planner for that. And so that's a lot of what Activate Vitality is about too, helping people kind of go, I'm depleted. I'm the opposite of feeling vital. So the planner and the program, they go together, but you can buy the planner on Amazon and I'll link it in the comments.
And I think that's a really help. It seems like there's really no way around it, but to stop and be reflective. As much as we wish there was like an easy button for finding our mission. So, because I would say similarly to me, I find the most clarity when I think and I write. I know it's probably not writing for everybody, but our brains don't function, reflectively unless there's some stop or some rhythms that we establish. So that's really, I think it's a really practical thing, it's like a simple step to take is, whether it's 5 minutes or whatnot, just to stop and be reflective a little bit.
And if you document it, you can look back for patterns too, right? So there's that value in writing it. Like, I think that what happens is that we can be experiencing emotions, and be in that emotional place, and we can get to a very logical place, but where we're most effective is when we're connecting logic and emotions. And so in writing or in talking, we're bringing words to what we're experiencing. And that is that sort of wise mind logic is our logical brain is required to find the words, right? And so writing is a beautiful way of doing that. And conversing is nice, but then we don't have a record to look back on when we're sort of feeling like, oh my gosh, it's terrible. It's always been terrible. I'm exhausted. I think I've been exhausted for a year. Well, let's flip back and look at what I wrote a month ago, 2 months ago. Oh, I was actually in a good place then. What was I doing? What was going on? What was I feeling good about? Okay, how do I bring threads of that into today where possible?
That's a good point. Like, to be able to look back and to kind of see it, and for the long term to record it. When do you think, or what role does maybe community or a group, your loved ones play in maybe helping you clarify the mission, or maybe editing the mission? Would you say that, what would that look like, you think?
We can't see what we can't see. And so we are so biased as individuals, especially about ourselves. We can't see, so often we can't see where we are strong and unique and have these gifts to contribute. But man, the people around us who love us, they see it. In therapy, there's often this idea of being on two mountains, and you're climbing your mountain and going up, and there are obstacles and pitfalls and rest spots and beautiful spots, and you can just see what you can see when you're standing on this mountain. And I'm on my mountain doing the same. I've got a different mountain with different challenges and different beauties and different experiences. And if I look over at your mountain, I can see things that you can't see. And if you look over at my mountain, you can see things on my mountain that I can't see about my journey. And so in community, in connection, in relationship, other people can reflect back to us when we lose our way, when we can't see the next step, when we can't see anything but the danger ahead of us. Other people can show you that big picture and say, no, remember that this is what you care about, and this is what's ahead, and you just need to actually take a left here and get back on the path.
That's a great analogy. I love that. And for you personally, would you say family has served that as well as, because I know you're pretty active on social media and with other OT coaches and things like that. Do you feel like it just kind of comes from everywhere?
Yeah, it comes from a lot of places, because I am someone who cares to put myself out there genuinely. I'm not trying to be anything that I'm not. It's easier that way. And in doing so, you start to see, like, people start to say, oh, I really love this thing about you, or I think that that's really cool. Or you start to see that, like Raina and I, right? You know, Raina Oliveira really well, and I do as well. And we are good friends, and we talk every day, and, you know, in one way or another. And, but we're very yin and yang in our styles about things. Like, fundamentally, we care about a lot of the same things, most of the same things, but our ways of going about them, there's some yin and yang, and that is an asset. And so I feel like sometimes we identify ourselves by contrast as well in community and go, oh, she's more like this, or she's more like that. And that helps me see that I'm kind of more like this. I didn't notice that I'm more like this. I just am what I am. But by sort of that connection with other peers, other people who are doing similar things to you, you start to notice and contrast those differences. And it happens in friendships and family. Most of my closest friends are psychologists, and so they're really good at calling me on my stuff.
Oh, no. That's good, but also painful sometimes, right?
Totally. They do it very gently and skillfully, luckily.
I'm sure they do, probably very skillfully. That's awesome. But I love that you highlight just the benefit of diversity in that process as well. I mean, everybody's different, but to have somebody who's very different and can speak into your world a little bit is very unique, and I'm sure brings a different perspective versus groupthink, where everybody's just on board and says, yeah, that's a great idea because I think I'm doing the same thing. So
it's true. And I think because when you're in these relationships that are respectful and that you admire what other people are doing that's different from your own style, sometimes we need to be a little bit brave and go, okay, yeah, maybe I can do a little bit of that. Maybe I need to bring a little bit of that. Like Raina's got this strong, brave energy, right? This let's do this. And like, well, I don't know, is it the right time? Like, find your path, right? And sometimes I need a little bit more Raina in me. And so I appreciate
you can call that out from you probably a little bit better.
Totally. She'll give me a little kick once in a while and say, I know what you're doing. I see it. I love it. It's you. But I want you to do a little bit more of this. I think that would make a really big difference for you. And I can be brave and process and take a deep breath and go, okay, yeah, I could try a little bit of that and see how that lines up.
That's awesome. I know you sent me a list of guiding values for this podcast. Can we maybe go through that same question and we've touched upon this a little bit, but why are values important? I know you said maybe to start there, but what is it about values that's so unique versus maybe mission statement? So
I think the mission statement is what we're trying to do, sort of like the goal we're trying to accomplish. What's the outcome? What are we working on? And then the values are, well, who are you in this, and how are you showing up, and what's going to be here no matter what problem we're trying to solve. And so I think we can have a goal and then see how to connect that to our values, but we can't make values based on a goal.
Yeah. So values are a little immutable, or that doesn't change because it's part of who we are. Would you say that's? I
mean, we grow and we come upon highlighting different values. I think fundamentally we end up staying who we are, but I mean, sometimes you meet those people who have really changed a lot, like maybe since high school or something like that. And you go, wow, like I'm curious about the life experiences that brought them to this place of really showing up in this different way. So I think there is room for our values to grow. And then I think there's room for our values, different ones to come out as a priority in a time or a phase. And so we might have a list of 15 values that inform how we live life. But in this season, maybe these top 3 are really what I'm connecting with, or what I need to bring to the forefront. Or maybe these ones are the ones that connect to this project, this mission, this thing I'm trying to do.
You mentioned, that we may have a long list, but then others kind of come and go. I don't know if this is really a practical question, or, is there a particular number of values that you find is helpful for yourself to reflect on and to try to practice actively? Or do you just kind of let your list of 15 be your list of 15 and let it ebb and flow as it comes?
I would say I probably have a list of around 6 that I really connect with in terms of me personally. I tend to write 3 of them down more regularly in my planner. Sometimes they can rotate a little bit based on my intention. So actually in the planner, there's a section that I have every week where it's the intention and the values. And the intention, I suppose, is the mission, that thing that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the values, I tend to pick out the ones that connect with that intention more so. I would say I probably do that in my kind of how I'm planning to use my time and energy in a week. But there's no magic number. No.
Makes sense. Yeah. Now, how often, it sounds like through your Activate Vitality Planner, you're revisiting values. How frequently? Every week, or more frequently than that?
Probably every week as a formal process. But I think they're showing up in big and small decisions all the time. How do I want to make a post on social media? How do I want to respond to this email? Or somebody's asked me to do this thing. Usually have to check back in on values, but it tends not to be formal because I am deeply connected to my values after years of this checking in. So it tends to be like, oh, that feels yucky. Why does that feel yucky? I can make it more like this. That would feel better. Well, what is it? If I were to analyze it, it's probably that I shifted it to connect more to my values.
Interesting. I think that's the big challenge that I find personally, is how do I stay connected to, deeply connected. I love that you said that, to the values. So, I've worked in a lot of organizations where mission drift is just the natural, and a lot of that, you can do value drift too. We just drift from these things unless there is some type of rhythm where we reevaluate it. And so, I think frequency of revisiting, realigning to those values is important. Have you seen that the planner seems to work really well for you? Have you seen other methods or any suggestions for somebody who maybe, like me, who maybe struggles to have that deep connection to their innate values?
I know for me, and this might relate more to my ADHD, but I think humans, we habituate, right? And so something like if you've got it on the wall, it becomes part of the background after a while. I was talking to one of the technicians at the pottery studio I go to, and we're talking about a particular glaze, and I said, "Oh, it's is that one going away?" And she said, "Oh, we're having all these problems with it. That's why we have this warning on the wall." And I thought, I've never read the warning on the wall. Like, is it just like it's just become part of the background noise, right? And so I find I need some novelty to change things up a little bit from time to time. So I've had phases where I incorporate connecting to my values into meditation, and whether that's sort of meditating on a word, or breathing in and connecting to those words, those values words. Sometimes it's just not words, though. It's sort of a felt sense, and so for me, it's that reflective process. I think when I'm reflecting on a day or a week in my planner, I'm directly really reflecting on where did I connect with the values. The values are known to me, and those highlights and smiley faces and things. Oh, right, those are values moments. So they're keeping connected in that way. Some people might like a mantra, or having it on their on their phone screen or their screensaver, or something like that. Some people have. I know there are apps that will even pop up to remind you to connect with a value, which can be really interesting. I'm not a big big fan of affirmations, but I think if an affirmation is more of a reminder to connect with your values, that you are this value and you just need to be reminded of it, that could be really powerful. I think where affirmations, the research on affirmations is that if it's not actually what you believe, it highlights the gap between where you are and where you'd like to be. But a value is who you are. You've already determined it's who you are. So if you have sort of a mantra or an affirmation that reminds you that you are this thing that you are already really clear on, you truly, genuinely are, that could be a nice reminder. Tattoos, people have them on tattoos all the time. If you think about word tattoos.
It's true. Because, and I think particularly community can maybe play a role in this part. If you have others around you who know your values and then can kind of revisit that with you a little bit.
Probably who we feel most connected with are people who share similar values. And that can be grounding when you're drifting off and hooked on some injustice or something that happened that's infuriating. The people that you go to for support, they're likely going to reflect back to you their values as well, and your values where they intersect.
So I think, we've talked a little bit about burnout. So we may have kind of answered this in part, but I just want to ask this question. Because in some cases, I feel like the burnout and the kind of the stress that comes from it can be directly related to conflict between a person's deeply held values and the constraints and, limitations of a person's context. That can at times make it very difficult to realize your values in practice. So we talked a little bit about that. Do you find that that's a common thing with the OTs that you're working with? Even now that we're coming out of COVID, do you anticipate that will kind of continue some of that?
You know what? I'm finding coming out of COVID, people more than ever are standing up for their values and kind of life's too short to do things that don't feel aligned. And so you hear about the Great Resignation. A lot of that is, wait a minute, I'm not living my life in an aligned way, in a way that I'm not showing up in life the way I want to be showing up. I'm not showing up with my priorities in mind. I'm not spending my time doing the things that make my life better. And that is leading people to leave jobs. And I think that can be a big part of it. I'm also thinking about as you were saying that question, a term that comes up actually typically around divorce is irreconcilable differences. And so are there, we're not going to fully align exactly with our employer's values or our employer's mission every single time, but is there enough of it that we're not feeling that we're incongruent entirely, because that is very stressful? Or are there ways we can more connect within what we're doing? Can we connect with our values in the way we're communicating with our peers, in the way we approach a client or a patient, in the way we choose activities in our work, that we can make things more values aligned. But if there are big value, irreconcilable differences between you and
it's not going to work.
You kind of probably have to go somewhere else. And I know that's a very privileged response. Not everybody can. Sometimes you're working in an area where that's the only place where you can work, or the way your family arrangement is, that you need the benefits connected to that job, and it's either you move or you work at that job. And so that can be a big recipe for burnout, and there's some extra work required to find ways to make that fit better.
I feel like even having the clarity of being clear on your own values and being clear on what your personal or professional mission is, even having that clarity, even if it doesn't align with your context, it at least helps in the process. So there's not that ambiguity of, am I so stressed when I go in? I think if it's, you're not able to live those out, the clarity helps you to know, okay, I can at least live this out potentially, or not live that out, even though I can't live maybe these values out. So I think the clarity of values can still be helpful. With any tips, we've gone through a lot of good stuff already. Any tips as far as last minute things that for OTs to better identify their values?
There are values checklists out there and values card sorts. They're not my favorite. I prefer, and I mean, it's a great way to kind of come across some words and see what you connect with. But I often don't find what I'm looking for on a list of words, or it's more the flavor of the word or this interpretation of it. It's more complex than that. And so I like the process of reflection, journaling, the planner, sort of being able to notice as you're living life, what are those things that really highlight, that light you up, that where you just feel like you are in the place you're meant to be, doing the thing you're meant to do. What are the factors that are contributing to that? And I feel like that we kind of wade into that through becoming more curious and more building that better self-awareness and noticing patterns over lifetime, as well as, like, it's hard to defend when you're 25, for instance, right? Like that you might not, where I was at in my early 20s is very different than where I'm at now. There are some fundamental things that came through, but I didn't know myself very well then. And I know myself a lot better at 45, 6. I'm going to be 47 soon, actually. So there's that kind of in process, like in progress. But one of my favorite values exercises that comes from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is it's called the sweet spot exercise. And so it's a journaling exercise or reflective exercise, but I would suggest you write it down at some point in the reflection. Is thinking back to a few different times where you felt that sense of flow, alignment, like, this is like the goods. Like, if I could be doing this in this moment for the rest of my life,
I'd be happy.
I'd be happy. Life would be fantastic. And writing what was going on in that moment, writing who was there, what was happening, what was your role, what were other people's roles, what were you seeing, what was in the environment, like really just kind of writing down all the magic of that moment. And then if you do that a few times, think about a few instances, start to notice patterns, right? This is like beautiful activity analysis, right? Really breaking it down and getting a sense of all the factors that create the magic. And I find that we pull values in that way. Actually, an interesting thing happened. I noticed that I kept putting travel down as a value. I'm like, travel's not a value. Like, travel's an occupation. And what is it? And what I was trying to communicate with travel was that sense of openness and adventure and flexibility and connecting and curiosity and having new experiences as a person who's not striving to change them, but as a person who wants to show up as a guest and experience them and feel that excitement of a new culture, new language, new food, new land, like new scenes, new experiences, new activities. And that's what travel is for me. And so I continue to write travel down as a value. And interestingly, in Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead, travel's listed as a value. I was like, oh, look at that.
Interesting. But I love that you point out the fact that our occupations are grounded in values, especially the ones that are meaningful, not just necessary, right?
Yeah.
The things that we're drawn to. So that's an interesting point, and kind of a good way, do our top down and kind of work from occupation and can even work our way back to, okay, so why do we do the occupations that we do? Why do we enjoy these things? That's a great other way to look at it. So I know this is the new project that you've gone through, and you sent me the values that kind of underline this project, including values alignment, unhustling, authenticity and transparency, embracing growth, self-compassion, balance, conscious rebellion. I love that one, by the way. Optimism without toxic positivity. And I know we've talked a little bit about toxic positivity and when you came onto the OT Minute. And the abundance mindset. And then you've got curiosity, creativity, humor, and playfulness. So I love all of those. And it seems like these have developed over a long time. It's not like you just sat down one day and came up with these. So can you maybe walk through a couple of those, or as many as you want, and how you develop those values? And then how do you hope or foresee them influencing this podcast?
So I am planning to do a series actually where I have a series of short episodes that explains each value. I'm thinking that might be a good thing to do. Good content map as well to fill in. But where I came to this, I had been sitting on this podcast idea for a few months and not acting on it. And when I would check in on why I wasn't acting on it, it was because I wasn't clear what it was going to stand for. Like I wasn't clear. They say similar to building a business or a program, you should be really specific about who your target audience is, what they're struggling with, why they need to show up and listen to you. And so at the time where I wanted to start the podcast, I was focusing more on women in midlife in my marketing, like just this stage of development where we're figuring ourselves out in a sort of a middlescence, like that, an adolescence that happens around perimenopause, where we're like, wait a minute, I've been doing everything for everybody else for a whole lifetime. Hey, what do I want? And it's a beautiful transformation. And so I was talking more about that. And so I was going to name my podcast like something about the midlife remix. Actually, I created a Facebook group about it. And then realized that, okay, if the podcast needs to lead people to my Activate Vitality program, and that messaging wasn't actually leading to more people joining the program. It's a theme that comes up in the program all the time, as does perimenopause and ADHD and burnout and finding more alignment, setting boundaries. Like I could talk about a lot of different sides of what we do inside the program in the content I'm putting out. But anyways, I was going round and round and round and lost and shifting my messaging in my business and in my marketing. What's actually happening in the program has always stayed the same. I decided to sit down and go, okay, what do I want this podcast to stand for? And I made a list of values that I was like, these are how I show up in my work. These are how I show up in my life. These are things that inform who I am. And what is, like, if I'm kind of stripping it back, less about transformation, like we do in marketing messaging, and more about having this set of kind of steady, Freddy, consistent values where we can evolve the messaging over time and the types of themes. The Brave OT seems to be consistent. There's that conscious rebellion. That's the juiciest one in there, right?
It's a great one. It pops every time I read it.
Totally. And so that, I think, kind of comes back to from a place of connecting with our values, slowing down and paying attention, dropping this kind of hustle, because the hustle is about other people, not about ourselves. Being authentic, that growth mindset, that embracing that sense of, well, let's try it and we'll learn and we'll evolve, leaving room to wiggle, right? That's brave. Being able to find balance in what we're doing, find occupational balance, find balance in lots of different ways, like not work-life balance, but embrace seasons and change and that sort of thing, and show up with this sense of optimism and without being overly toxically positive. Like it's all of this is evidence-based stuff too. And so
that helps. So it'll be timeless as well, which is great.
Exactly. And so really this kind of describes the tone of how I've worked in my program, how I've worked in my life, how I parent, how I show up in relationships. And that then led to, okay, I think this is the Brave OT podcast. And this is what I stand for. Then I ran with it. And so I was like, right, okay, I know how to do this.
That's awesome.
Because I do this.
Yeah. It's just a matter of getting to talk it out with others. That's awesome. I'm excited to see how this podcast will kind of continue to live these out, because I read these and I get pumped. So, and I'm sure any OT would as well. So that's awesome. And I know today we talked a little bit about values. And so that's a great starting point, I think, being able to align our lives with values and to kind of establish a direction, what outcomes we want, just to get that clarity. Now, last thing, I just wanted to talk resources real quick. I'm a big resource guy myself. I love to kind of have places where I can dig a little bit deeper. So any particular resource that you think is helpful for when trying to dig into values and mission? I know you mentioned the Activate Vitality Planner. That sounds like a really great hands-on way to walk through that. So you can go over that, or anything else that you have found helpful?
There are so many great books, and I know books aren't necessarily the way everybody wants to explore those things, but I feel like sometimes just listening to different ways of getting there can be really helpful. And then I hesitate to give people like, oh, here's my top favorite 5 books on the topic, because then it sends people down a rabbit hole of to-dos. And is that how they want to connect, right? I have a Facebook group, and it's OTs Rising Together, Banish Burnout, and Find Your Mojo. And so I include themes in there. People are welcome to come join me in the Facebook group. And as I read articles or as I find other things that kind of connect with that sense of how do we show up, how do we rise and have these good lives professionally, personally, I try to share extra resources in there. I'll be sharing lots of resources in the podcast, but I would say if I were to think of my favorite resources connected to this, it's a lot of the acceptance and commitment therapy learning I've done. So Activate Vitality, ACT is capitalized because ACT informs all of it. Once I learned ACT, I changed how I was living. I became more aware of this process of connection, reflection, values. Am I moving toward living my values or moving away from living my values? When I'm moving away, I tend to be hooked by some sort of thought or feeling. How can I make room and unhook through some awareness, curiosity, mindfulness type of stuff, and then choose a toward move? What value am I going to connect with? Like, that's ACT in a nutshell. And so
that's a great summary right there.
If I had to quickly throw out a few lines on it, yes. So I think there are like lots of great books out there. I mean, obviously my Activate Vitality program, I help OTs have that similar transformation of finding that way of learning to live this way, so that they can be more them in all they do. But some of my, like Russ Harris, if you follow some of his content, I recommend his book, The Confidence Gap, a lot to people. And it's oriented to a little bit more to when anxiety comes up and gets in the way of us living fully. And but it's teaching all of the ACT processes. So then it's an easy self-help read. But he's got lots of cool videos out there on YouTube as well.
That's awesome. That's a great resource. What came to mind as we were talking and just where you began, where values and mission really needs to come from self-awareness and spending some time digging through that. I think something that's helped me in the process has been the Myers-Briggs, just kind of understanding my personality, and that has some great information as far as what drives you, why you think the way you do. So that I think, reflecting back, that's been a helpful tool in my own journey. And kind of trying to identify values. And then the Strength Finders as well, which is a book. And again, this is more about getting to know yourself. And then I think from that, the values kind of spring forth a little bit easier.
I think so. I did the Strengths Finder assessment with a person in my circles here, and it's interesting to look at. My values show up in there, and then there's also my skills and strengths and weaknesses, right, too. And so it's interesting when you combine those things, because they're different flavors of who you are and what makes you effective. Where do you need other people to support you? Where I have no purple in the Strengths Finder. There's this whole purple section that's basically executive functioning. I have almost none.
Oh no! That's right. You must be strong in a lot of other areas.
I am, and a lot of those are around connection and that sort of thing, right? And creativity, awesome. and those things do inform my values, because they're my chicken or egg. I don't know, but
I was just reading something today where millennials, breaking it down more by population group, that millennials tend to be driven by values, if it's not meaningful, they're motivated by meaningfulness. And so I think it's going to be an important thing as OTs to even think about as we're working with a particular population, we really want to dig into that value component. I know for me, sometimes, in a hospital setting, I skip the values and beliefs section.
But aren't you a millennial?
I am. I know. I'm just trying to keep up, But I relate to that, and I think that as we see younger people in hospitals or in our practices, or again, I'm sure maybe if somebody's working with pediatrics already, they see that a lot more. So it'll be interesting how it continues to be an important thing as an OT to really dig into values.
I think it's so cool. I love that you brought up the generational thing, because I think that a lot of the transformation I'm seeing in the Gen Xers that I help is that shift more toward being a little bit more millennial around values. Yeah. Because I think that's something the millennials have done well.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I feel like in social media now, there's a lot more cross connect between generations a little bit. And so you're getting a little lead in a good way. So that's awesome.
Well, because but Gen X, a lot of us, like, we had baby boomer parents, right? And so those baby boomers came from a time of coming out of war and like being born after war. And so their parents were really making do with limited resources. And so baby boomers just had to work hard. And then Gen Xers had to just figure it out. And then there's like a softening that happens in a beautiful way, I think, that whereas the millennials are like kind of from this place of, okay, it's less connected to trauma and like really scarce times and more about quality and what's good and how can we make things better. And so I think Gen X is kind of in the middle of that
transition in a way. Yeah. So that's a different way to look at it. I love it. Well, thanks for allowing me to kind of pick your brain a little bit. I hope it's helpful to some listeners, and I really enjoyed the conversation today.
I feel like I've learned a lot about myself in this process. So I thank you. I'm going to have to get this transcribed and stick it in my planner or something, because so, like you said, right, in community, there's that sense of community that helps us figure ourselves out. And if I just go about living my life this way and doing my work this way, it just is like, it's just normal, right? But pausing to reflect on, well, what are those things that makes this unique? It really helps me understand myself. And I appreciate the function of this was to help listeners, people who are listening to this podcast, understand what I'm all about, to see if they want to listen and they want to hear more of it. So I really appreciate you being willing to interview me on my podcast.
Of course, it's great. Any excuse to have a good conversation.
And I'm going to flip a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about where to find you and your YouTube channel? Is that
Sure. So I run the OT Minute on YouTube. So it's a channel that really, I try to live out kind of just a curiosity and lifelong learning principles. So I'm kind of always going back to even foundational knowledge, whether it's theories or diagnosis specific information or anything else that just piques my interest. So it's kind of a place that I hope OTs can come and continue to get some good information that's hopefully evidence-based and just interesting. So definitely would encourage anybody, if they think that might be interesting, to check it out. Obviously, I'm a new practitioner, so the information a lot I think is great for students and new OT grads. But I find that some of it's just timeless, like the theories, the frames of reference, those types of things. So continuing to hopefully add content as time allows.
I think it's helpful for us old OTs too, because I was looking through your videos, and like, if I were to change focus, I've been working in adult mental health most of my career. And if I was to explore another area of practice, like, I would feel like less skilled than when I was a new grad in many areas, because I just had no contact for 20 years, right? And so I think that we old OTs can benefit from new information. And that's why so many OTs like having students too, because they bring fresh information, fresh knowledge, curiosity, and openness, sort of like travel. And I think that that's really cool. So I can imagine YouTube, but the nature of YouTube, younger people go there more often. But I think maybe some of my age mates might benefit from that too.
Yeah, that's the beauty of OT, right? We can always switch and pivot, and there's always things to learn. I don't think we'll ever stop learning. So that's the beauty of it.
It really is.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Arno.
If bravely pursuing more flow in the way you live and work is something you need more of, let's hang out. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and check out the links in the show notes for things we chatted about in this episode. As always, keep it real and be brave, OTs.